I'm Deacon Eric.
And I'm Dr. Brett Sockel.
And you're listening to Thinking Faith.
This is a podcast brought to you by the Archdiocese of Regina, where we attempt to navigate this winding road of faith in Jesus Christ so that we might know Him more intimately, love Him more profoundly, and together serve Him more deeply in our daily lives.
Welcome, everyone, to another week of Thinking Faith, and in fact, Rethinking Faith.
Right, yeah, so we're going to continue digging into the back catalog, the over 430 episodes that we had in audio-only format before we moved to YouTube. I know I want to figure out what I'm going to say today.
And now you don't have to.
No.
And we hope you enjoy your helping of Rethinking Faith this week. Welcome, everyone, to another week of Thinking Faith, kind of a special Advent-y Christmas edition, and made more special by the fact that we have our very own Archbishop Don Bolen, not quite in studio, but in virtual studio with us here today. Welcome, Bishop Don.
Thanks very much. Great to be with you.
Yeah, and in studio and talking about what I, at least in my experience, believe to be one of your favorite subjects. I'm sure you've got a number of favorite subjects, but this is the one that I like hearing the most about too, the Incarnation, and the Nativity. We'll touch on kind of the traditional nativity scenes and stuff as well. But yeah, it's one that I've been blessed to hear you speak on in a few different occasions through our lay formation program. And so, yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a little while.
And part of the background here is Pope Francis's new book on the Nativity.
Exactly.
So that was kind of the inspiration for this, and Bishop Don's already done a little bit of work on that book. There's a video on YouTube with the reflection that maybe we'll link to in the show description or something like that. But
yeah, and we shared that video in our Advent email newsletter that goes out, that's been going out through the weeks of Advent and stuff too. So yeah, very, very good reflection on that. And I thought it was an interesting confluence of things. Pope Francis puts out a book on the Nativity and various aspects of the Nativity scenes. And I know, Bishop Don, you have amassed quite a collection of Nativity scenes over your lifetime.
Yes,
yeah.
indeed. Well, I think Christmas was always an important time for us as family, and then setting up the nativity scene was a big event. When I moved to Europe and had the chance to work in Rome at the Holy See for 7 years, from 2001 to 2008, I started to become acquainted with especially the Italian tradition of presepios, of nativity scenes. And in the Piazza Navona, it becomes a public market before Christmas. And a number of stands from both Naples and Sicily set up little shops where they sell their nativity pieces. And each one is handmade out of clay. And they use different colored cloths to decorate them. And really, they depict the entire village being present at the birth of Christ.
Oh, wow.
And then it was a special moment when I was visiting Naples, and there's a 3-block stretch, which is all shops, artisanal shops selling their nativity pieces. So it's a real cottage industry. And
wow.
The beautiful thing was that the mangers and the village, the houses that are part of these nativity sets, which sometimes have hundreds of pieces and buildings, it was theirs. It was right there in Naples, in that neighborhood. So what they were depicting, really starting in the 16th, 17th century, I think, was Christ coming into their neighborhood and into their world. So that gave it a special significance. And these pieces are very beautiful, very expensive. So you kind of treat yourself by buying one new piece. Shepherd or each year. On a big year, you splurge for the 3 kings. But anyway, then in my travels while working in Rome, I started collecting other nativity pieces to join in with the Italian idea that everybody gathers at this scene. And so I have some beautiful, well, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph come from a monastery in France, and I've got camels made of some kind of marble that I picked up in Morocco, and some Jewish figures who are from a market in Krakow, and others from South Korea, and olive wood pieces from Israel. Anyway, it's a kind of an international gathering.
An international and eclectic collection. I love that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But there's a beautiful story that you guys won't have heard because it happened yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So last year, one of the staff got the idea that I would bring my entire nativity scene into the office, and that we'd put it near the entrance of the office. But the person at the office who was unpacking it said, Mary and Joseph aren't here. And so yesterday we went through boxes of other pieces looking for Mary and Joseph, and they were not to be found. And then I went to look at what she had set up, and they were there, but they were hidden. She didn't recognize them.
She didn't. Oh, interesting.
And I thought, well, that's beautiful, because when God took flesh in Mary and the mystery of incarnation unfolded, people in the neighborhood didn't recognize that something special was going on. God didn't come with a trumpet blast saying, I am your Messiah, listen here, and show great displays of power. God came in hiddenness and poverty. And so it's a beautiful thing that Mary and Joseph were kind of lost in the community of those who were gathered without being recognized. But Jesus's mom and dad were pulled out of the crowd yesterday afternoon.
Nice.
I'm thinking of the innkeeper. Like, it would have been handy at least if he had got the message, right?
Ahead of time. Oh, yeah.
But
Gabriel could have made one extra stop and said, hey, in 9 months, you need to have a room available.
And historically, you don't want to end up looking like a jerk, like the guy that turned the incarnate word away, Yeah. Didn't work that way.
No, it didn't. Yeah. But that's such a beautiful story, and underscores, I think, just as you pointed out, how unobtrusive God is in the incarnation. Just the whole, right from Mary and Joseph themselves being just part of the neighborhood, part of people's families, part of the community. And nothing. I think I was preaching a retreat last week in Momart, and that was one of the things that we were reflecting on in the Annunciation. Gabriel's declaration of Mary is full of grace, and pondering the idea that Mary herself wouldn't have necessarily labeled herself as full of grace. That I don't think that's how you get full of grace, by saying, oh yeah, I know. I've always been like this kind of thing, right? It's a humble recognition that comes from God to us, that's kind of sets her apart and stuff. So yeah. And so through his reflections on the nativity and the nativity scenes, Pope Francis, I think, does. Now, I haven't read the book. I'm not sure if you were able to get a copy and read it in advance, Bishop Don?
I was, and
okay.
I think Brett got me the copy.
Oh, good.
Why don't you introduce the book, Brett, and then I'll share a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say, except that this year Pope Francis released a book on the Nativity. I have a connection with New City Press, and so they reached out to me, and I knew that they knew through me about your interest in the Nativity, and so they sent out a couple of free copies. And within the book, the Pope sort of takes these little vignettes from Scripture related to the traditional nativity scene, the different characters that show up in our nativity scenes, and then writes, a reflection on the angels or the shepherds, or that kind of thing. And so it's really in this tradition of the sort of piety around the figures of the nativity, but also very scripturally sort of rooted. So
And it should be added that, I mean, it's a new book, but it wasn't that Pope Francis sat down to write a book about incarnation. This is a collection of texts from homilies, from audience addresses, where he has spoken about the birth of Jesus. And so to step back for a moment, you know, as a homilist and as someone who's, you know, as a bishop, you only go to a community once every year or two when you have 135 parishes in your diocese. You can't afford to talk about anything other than what's most central, which is the Incarnation and the Paschal Mystery. And so I'm constantly trying to find new and creative ways to speak about Incarnation and Paschal Mystery, of course. And it's interesting that when you go into your kind of cliched mode of presenting about those things, how easy it is for people's eyes to glaze over, even though you're talking about the things that are most ultimately most important. So I have great admiration for the absolute creativity of Pope Francis in the many ways in which he kind of imaginatively brings to the forefront the salvific dimension of Christ taking flesh. And sometimes it's by going into great detail about the various figures who were gathered at the birth of Christ, using a presepio to do so, a nativity scene. And sometimes it's pondering, drawing on the patristics to talk about how God became abbreviated. That's the extraordinary patristic image to speak about incarnation, how God became small, became abbreviated. Often, Pope Francis is talking about the tenderness of God when he speaks about the incarnation. And at one point he talks about God's small hands, you know, the infinite author of all creation has such small hands. It reminds me of this extraordinary poem by E.E. Cummings, which ends with nobody, not even the rain, has such small hands.
Yeah.
Really talking about the fragility that God takes on in becoming human. But Pope Francis in this book, it's a beautiful collection of creative reflections on incarnation. So anybody who needs to preach about incarnation with some frequency and doesn't want the people of God to be saying, we heard you say that story last time, you said that exact same thing. It's a really good creative resource to turn to.
That's excellent.
And as always, you know, Pope Francis's principal focus is God's mercy. And so he speaks very beautifully about how God's mercy and tenderness is unfolded in the way in which God comes to take flesh.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now I'm making a mental. I should have known about this before. I could have added it to my Christmas list. It's a little late now, but who knows?
Well, if you have to preach next week, you can borrow it. I've got one in my office.
There we go.
I'm reading it today because I'm giving a recollection at Holy Cross tomorrow on the Gospel of Luke, the nativity stories in the Gospel of Luke. So,
oh, nice.
So I'm going to be reading it in more detail today. But Bishop Don, was there one story or one image from that book that jumped out at you as like, maybe you'll preach it this year, or, you know, some real nugget that you would share with us?
Well, I mean, a couple of the texts that were in there were texts that were held the nuggets that I had preached on or used in Christmas messages in years past, especially this image of God having small hands. But this is not an answer to your question. But this year, I'm always looking, right? And when people send Christmas messages or greetings, sometimes, especially theologian type friends like yourself, Brett, will include like a link to something. So one friend in Saskatoon sent me a link to a poem by the American poet Denise Leffertoff called The Annunciation. And I had never come across this poem before. I'd come across Denise Leffertoff. I did not know that she had become Catholic at the end of her life. And I don't know at what point she wrote this poem, but I'm just going to read you a little excerpt from it here. So it's about the Annunciation, and here is the segment where it talks about what question Gabriel brought to her, the mystery, in Levertoft's words, the mystery she was offered. And I quote, "To bear in her womb infinite weight and lightness, to carry in hidden finite inwardness, 9 months of eternity, to contain in slender vase of being the sum of power, in narrow flesh the sum of light. Then to bring birth, push out into air a man-child needing, like any other, milk and love, but who was God." It's a beautiful presentation of the mystery of infinite becoming not only finite, but small. I've always been taken by expressions about the Incarnation in our tradition, which try to unfold that mystery of what is great becoming small. And here are some of my favorites. In the early church, Eusebius speaks of how Mary, for 9 months, I quote, "entertained within the closet of her flesh the hope of all the ends of the earth." Another, the poet John Donne, grapples with the paradox of Mary as her maker's maker. She is the blessed one whose womb was a strange heaven, for there God clothed himself and grew. And there's an old Anglican hymn that speaks of Mary as the rose blossoming from the wintry earth of human history, and notes, "For in this rose contained was heaven and earth in little space." So those are all images which somehow speak of the eternal Son of God, not contained by the whole universe, coming to dwell here in small space, always proclaiming God's desire to be with us, God's desire to draw near. So I've got a couple of new pieces to add to my kind of collection of resources with which to preach the mystery of incarnation.
And God always draws this concept of God drawing near to us where we are at, even as you were talking about before, the way the traditions in Italy of portraying the Nativity within our own neighborhoods, within our own spaces. That can be a challenging thing for us to grasp. I think it's easy and it's comforting to kind of romanticize the Incarnation, to kind of create an idyllic scene within our imaginations and in our art and stuff like that. But that's not what God does in this whole process. It's a less than romanticized image, the Incarnation, and yet there's a profound intimacy within that, a God becoming part of our real lives and our real worlds. How do we communicate that? That's a challenging thing for us to kind of communicate to people, the concreteness of God within what's really not a less than ideal life situation in most days. I mean, yeah.
There's a couple of resources for doing so. Many of our listeners will know William Kurlick, great Canadian painter from decades ago, and he put out a collection of paintings called A Northern Nativity, where he depicted Christ being born in the middle of winter in various places in Canada, in poverty, in a logging camp, in an igloo, in an abandoned grain elevator. Back in 1982-83, I was living at Madonna House, and one of the paintings in there was showing Mary and Joseph arriving with the newborn at the farmhouse at Madonna House, just outside of Combermere, Ontario. And Kurlick has an introduction which really ponders that, the Incarnation coming to where we are, and says, if it happened then, why not now? If it happened there, why not here? So the nativity pieces from around the world they are a great resource. You know, I've got among my collection here a nativity set from Tanzania, which shows Tanzanian tribal leaders gathering around the birth of Christ, with the animals not being a shepherd and a lamb, but a zebra and a leopard. And I've got one from Afghanistan, which shows traditional rural Afghani home. I think those are good creative ways in that everywhere the gospel has spread, people have been encouraged to ponder the mystery of incarnation in relation to their world, Christ coming into their world. This year, I'm mindful that we're celebrating Christmas at a time when the world is, you know, so deeply wounded. And there are two wars which are very much in our consciousness, and they just seem situations which are so intractable and where there's just no easy resolution, and where some prophetic leadership could come forth. Instead, we see chaos. Right? And yet we go into shopping malls and we hear jingly tunes, and we hear this public display of Christmas, which is commercialized. And I don't want to dismiss that. You know, I mean, I'm grateful that our culture takes Christmas at least on some level, but it surely doesn't draw us into the mystery, and it doesn't draw us to the depths of hope about how we can continue with courage and perseverance in a world that's so wounded and so broken. So we need resources that help us to understand that it's still in our broken world, with Palestine and Hamas at war with Israel and Russia and Ukraine under siege. And in our broken world, Christ continues to take flesh.
I'm thinking of the Feast of the Holy Innocents. You know, if there's anything that mitigates against an idealized nativity, it's that, like, within a few weeks or whatever it was, that violence sort of rained down in a sort of unimaginable, horrific way. You know, so Scripture is not sort of naive about what Jesus is coming into. I mean, it's dangerous from the beginning, right? Mary might get stoned. That's a possibility, right? This is why Joseph wants to be so careful, because Mary's already in great danger just for being pregnant. And then we see the Feast of the Holy Innocents. So I wonder if those give us some scriptural ways of thinking about, or how we might talk about, you know, I'm thinking the parallel, right? The same way in which you're describing, okay, Jesus comes into this particular time and place, and so we can imagine him in our particular times and places. But then that particular time and place was also violent and dangerous.
Yes.
And so it's not like it's a stretch to go from the one to the other, right?
And as we ponder Christmas and celebrate Christmas and the mystery of incarnation, we do so with a Paschal lens, right? So, I mean, the incarnation lands the Word made flesh, the eternal God becoming human, on the cross. The world greets the incarnate Word on the one hand with welcome and joy as good news, and on the other as a threat, who's undermining our world order and our way of doing and seeing things, and puts him to death. So the incarnation has a jagged edge right from the beginning, because the cross is, you know, that song "Rhythm of the Saints" by Paul Simon, that cross is in the ballpark right from the beginning. Right? The cross is in the ballpark. It's always it's always there.
There's an image, you might be familiar with the St. John's Bible. So this illuminated manuscript, which is the first handwritten Bible, more or less, since the printing press. I mean, people just stopped writing Bibles because the amount of work was just, unbelievable. And so at St. John's in Minnesota, that was like an anniversary project, was they were actually going to write a Bible. And the image, I think it's at the frontispiece for the Gospel of Luke, is the manger, but there's light breaking in through the roof, and it's refracted somehow near the top so that the light coming in on the manger is actually cruciform. Mm-hmm. It's a cross-shaped light, and it indicates just what you're talking about, Bishop Don. And I'm reminded of two other things. One is that part of the symbolism of a manger is what you put in a manger gets consumed. Right? A manger is an offering. And so it's already in the image of a manger, you have something that is at risk and being offered. And the second is a story that my mom tells. When I was a little boy, it was Christmas Eve and the family was getting ready for church, and I was refusing to go. And I was distraught. I don't know how old I was, maybe 4 or 5. And, so finally mom sat down and said, like, what's going on? How come you won't get ready for church? And I remembered Good Friday from the previous year. And I said, I'm not doing this again. I know what happens at the end of this. I'm not going to celebrate this birthday. They're going to kill him in like 3-4 months. And it had rattled me. I was not going to do this again. I don't remember it, but that's the story my mom tells.
Wow. The young theologian.
Yeah.
She does say that. Actually, when I phoned her to say I was going to theology school, she says, yeah, I know.
Started a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think that's what I find most challenging is, I'm thinking right now as we're having these discussions, whether it's the families that Melissa and I journey with in our mental health ministry, or I've got family members who've suffered significant losses this year. This is a very grief-filled Christmas for a number of close family members. It's hard to speak. I don't know how to speak a word of hope in the midst of some of those situations, like the Incarnation kind of invites us to discover. But I think in some ways it's a discovery that has to be experienced. I don't know how you can speak into that.
Well, I mean, I expect, Eric, in those situations, you're there, right? You show up to those relationships and to be with those people around you who are experiencing loss or grief or suffering. And that's precisely the incarnational act. And the incarnation is ultimately not a book, and it's not a word spoken in writing, it's spoken in flesh. And so incarnational faithfulness in the first instance is not a verbal witness, but a presence, a walking with. And that's probably what people will value and appreciate, because I think people in grief, people in time of loss and in time of deep suffering, often find words that used to be meaningful, crashing against the hard waves or wall of suffering and of brokenness, and the words lie flat on the ground, whereas your presence, your showing up, matters greatly, and brings consolation, because they communicate they're not alone in the situation. And that's precisely what God communicates to us in the Incarnation. You're not alone. I am with you. So
in your neighborhoods, in your suffering. Yeah. So then expanding that out then to kind of where this part of the conversation started, how do we be present with when we turn on the news and we see that for more than a year now, there's been this war going on in Ukraine and Russia, and this outbreak of war and violence again in the Holy Land, in the area where this incarnation first took place. And we can feel powerless in the face of that, impotent in the face of that, nothing that we can do in this. And so how do we be present and accompany in that kind of space? Would be another question on my mind that I think, yeah.
Well, let me start with a couple of things, and then Brett's going to chime in, I'm sure, with filling in gaps here. First of all, I mean, in our own world and in our own lives, to be people of hope, to people who can stand in the midst of ashes and rubble and be signs of hope, to keep a perspective that God is with us no matter how painful or broken a situation is. It's hard to believe that, right? It's not so hard in the abstract, but it's hard in the reality of circumstances. I think a lot of people do lose faith precisely when life falls apart on some level. And if we function and live out of the depth of Christian tradition, then our lives don't fall apart at that point because we have a paschal lens. I would say in the past 7 years, in dealing with some very painful situations, I've said on a few occasions, if my faith wasn't a paschal faith, I wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Incarnational faith is paschal. It's paschal is always absorbing death and yet hearing that life triumphs over death, hearing resurrection. So that's one thing, to keep present as a person of hope, and as our friend Leah Perot likes to say, show up for your life. Keep, don't run away from your life into. For me, the temptation is board games. Life becomes overwhelming. So instead of dealing with them, I'll go online and play board games. But it's a nice little relief or reprieve. But show up for your life. Then I think there are ways of standing in solidarity or accompanying those who are suffering. And maybe we have the opportunity to do that with people around us most immediately. And maybe we do that on a communal level. We go to the Marian Center and serve the Christmas meal to homeless. Maybe we do it by supporting organizations that are connected to the people who are victims of war and violence. And maybe there's more direct means. I mean, maybe we're able to become engaged on a social justice level to address situations of brokenness and injustice. But always there are ways to act, even if they're small ways. And God takes our small ways always and is ready to use them as part of the larger work that God desires to do. Over to you, Brett. That's my introduction.
Well, it's perfect because I just had one thought, and you led right into it. It's not exactly the war question, but it's similar. So I've been challenged lately with the question of poverty and my presence and relationship with the poor. It's partly because I just got a whole bunch of work, and it's the first time, the last couple of months, the first time in my life that we haven't been paycheck to paycheck. We have a little fat, and so then the question is like, okay, so what's your responsibility with that? And you look out and you see that the amount that you have is completely insignificant to the size of the problems in the world, right? Like, oh, I got an extra $200. Okay. And so what, right? Like, and what I started doing, and it happened 3 times in the last week. I said, God, show me the poverty that you want me to see now. and we got a turkey because we spent enough on groceries at Superstore. We got a free turkey, and we didn't need it because we're going to my parents' house for Christmas. And like that day, we found someone who needed a turkey. And then
Wonderful.
then I was in church, and there was a sort of longstanding sort of pillar of the community who is slowing down and needed help at church, and we were able to help. It wasn't financial, but it was still, I was praying, show me, where there's need, and there was something very specific and concrete that we could do. And then I was just away at a meeting, and a longtime friend and colleague there was in a real tough spot. And when I first overheard it, I thought, gosh, like anything I could do would be so small, there would be no help at all. I have no idea how it could help. But I just prayed, and I said, so how am I supposed to help this person? And it became very clear what it was. Within the day, by the end of the meeting, it became perfectly clear what it was. It was the tiniest little thing, but I did it, and she was sort of overwhelmed with gratitude.
Yeah.
And so like 3 times in the last week, I've just said, like, show me the poverty that I'm supposed to be noticing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's like, oh, that there's this many homeless people in Canada, well, then I'm like, well, I don't know, I can't do anything. If it's like, this person could use a turkey, this person could use a book, this person could use a hand with this small thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this practice has been really impactful. And here's the thing, it's not just impactful for the people who get the turkey. Like, it's impactful for us. Like, we, after the turkey situation, Flannery and I looked at each other like, how does that even happen? Like, yeah. What are the odds that we were like, okay, we got this turkey that we don't need, and now, like, on our door, literally on our doorstep is a person who needs a turkey. And we just asked, like, hey, how can we, do something today, So like, ask God to show you like one tiny thing. And if there's some situation that looks really overwhelming, because at least two, and maybe all 3 of the situations I referenced, and I didn't go into a lot of detail because I don't want to mess with people's privacy and that kind of thing, but in 2 or 3, or maybe all 3, people are in situations that seem completely overwhelming. And it looks like our capacity to help them is actually like negligible. And that's actually a lie. Like, like, our capacity to help is not negligible. The little things we did, actually, these people experienced them as much bigger than we experienced them. Yeah. So you can do something. And if your imagination is having trouble seeing that, then just ask God to help your imagination. It's amazing how it works. Really, I'm just sort of flabbergasted at it.
That is a beautiful approach to incarnational prayer. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, very much. And I'm thinking as you're sharing that, Brett, near the end about our fears around the insignificance, right away the image of the small hands of the Incarnation, right, in the midst of that, just kind of springs to mind, right? Yeah. The
words of the Christina Rossetti poem, In the Bleak Midwinter, that we sometimes sing as a carol. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would give a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. What I have, I give my heart. That the little things matter. There are times when we come up against really situations that are so broken that it seems like what we do doesn't help. But God's engagement with the world and with people's lives is always bigger than ourselves as well. And we might not end up leaving a particular encounter feeling good as you were able to in those experiences. But that doesn't mean God's not in the situation. And it doesn't mean that things are as hopeless as they may look at any given moment. So it's a time also of really being nourished by a deep trust in God's drawing near and God's faithfulness to us so that we can live in this broken world and go into places of brokenness and not be destroyed by them and not move to despair, but be witnesses to hope and to life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my wish for all our listeners. It's quite a delight to be with you before Christmas here, and to spend a little time sharing about something that is sometimes so difficult to put into words, and yet such a deep source of hope and of joy.
Yeah, it's been a joy having you on the show, Bishop Don, and this has been a great conversation. I think I really, just even personally, a good prelude to the to this abbreviated season of Advent shifting into Christmas coming up very soon.
Yeah.
And so I know our listeners, this will be airing just the week before Christmas, the week. Yeah, just for us, it'll be next week, and that I think it'll be a very good, very well timed.
I have one last story to end with.
That would be beautiful.
When I was working in Rome, before I was working, I spent a year studying, trying to complete a doctorate that never got done, and I was living at the Canadian College near Rome, and it was the Jubilee year. It was 1999, and everybody was getting ready for 2000. And there was a great deal of attention about the Holy Door, Porta Santa, that was going to be opened at the Vatican, at St. Peter's. And indeed it was, and it was a magnificent, ornate door with beautiful bronze art. But between the Canadian College and St. Peter's Basilica is a very poor neighborhood, the Borgo. And there was an older house that had, I don't know if this was the door to a house or to some little shop, whatever it was, but it was an iron door and it was old and rusty. And somebody had taken spray paint and wrote Porta Santa on that door. And I thought, okay, well, this is the Holy Door. The Holy Door opens before all of us in the concrete and sometimes wounded situations of our lives. Christ is present. The Christ child is there. God is waiting to greet us, to welcome us, and to receive our help. Christ, the little one, is ever before us. So, Merry Christmas to you both, and Merry Christmas to all your listeners. And great to be with you on this your famous podcast.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too, Bishop Don, and all of those who joined us this week and every week throughout this past year and throughout the years of this podcast. As always, we pray that you and those you love may always have a faith that is seeking understanding.
St. Thomas and St. Ignatius,
pray for us.
Amen.
Amen.
God bless everybody.